Hey, what's up, buddy?
Hey, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. What's up?
Uh, so, I don't know how you, I guess we're just gonna chat because I'm not really sure how to debate any of our disagreements. Um, I don't know if it's relevant, to your stream, who I am. I'm just some random dude. Um,
Well, I mean, you can like introduce
but,
your background or whatever.
okay. Well, I think it's mentioned on your stream already, but I have a master's degree in, biology, specializing in applied ecology. Um, and when I did my undergraduate, my honors thesis was in the was for evolution and ecology stream. But before that, I have a background in philosophy, specifically epistemology and philosophy of science. I specialized in that up until like third year before I switched to biology. So in some way, I was really interested in some of your past talks with your friend. I forgot his name, Rem or something, because like he has way more education than I do, but I think he's pretty good at explaining um, some of the problems that he has with your positions that are kind of similar to some of the problems I have with your positions.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like a lot of it's kind of hard to tell what you like because you tend to change your opinion over time, and it's kind of hard to keep track of what your current positions are. So maybe I can start just by asking you if you still believe what I think you believe, especially when it comes to like moral questions, and then downstream it's going to affect like the values that you care about when you talk about veganism or abortion when you have those debates, right?
Sure.
Um, so. So yeah, just to make sure, I guess on abortion, do you still basically believe that it's immoral to kill a like say 1 second old fetus? Like you still ascribe moral relevance at the moment of conception, even though like politically you think you're still pro-choice, right?
Kind of. It sounds a little deontological, but I mean, I can say yes, I guess, for the purposes of this discussion, sure.
Okay. And with veganism, you still believe that people who, for example, people who um, are against, who find it morally reprehensible for an individual to torture animals, if they eat meat, you consider that's a very inconsistent, hypocritical viewpoint, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that torturing for pleasure. Well, I mean, yeah, I would say these two positions are very, very close to one another. You might be able to nuance out a difference between the two, but I'd say that they're pretty close to being indistinguishable. Yeah.
Okay. Do you still call yourself a moral anti-realist or a moral relativist?
Yeah, I think both of those terms, sure.
Okay, so I remember this was a while ago. I think you had a there was a really long video with your philosopher friend, and you talked about he tried to convince you how ridiculous the position of moral anti-realism is.
Mm-hmm.
And you did not change your mind. So what about that conversation? Like, if you remember that conversation, what about it was unconvincing to you? Because maybe there's something lost in the language there.
Mm-hmm.
I find that philosophers, like the more educated you are in philosophy, the more difficult it is to kind of talk about very foundational moral positions because philosophers have to use different sorts of language to basically formalize their argument, because otherwise if they refer to other words like good or bad, for example, in moral philosophy, you can't use those words when you're trying to ascribe certain attributes to good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise it becomes circular reasoning. So sometimes it's really, really difficult to kind of understand what they're talking about. So I have a feeling that a lot of the disagreement or unconvincing arguments kind of stem from there. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on what you remember from that conversation.
Sure, so this is what it felt like his argument was. I don't think there was a language barrier here, but this is what it felt like his argument was. It felt like he was essentially saying that for us to even have a discussion on epistemology, we already have to make the decision that we want to have a discussion, or that it's worth having a discussion of epistemology. So like, by virtue of that alone, that decision to value something is necessarily a moral one. So morality has to precede any possible conversation we could ever have about anything. So therefore, we have to be a moral realist, because to be a moral anti-realist necessarily devolves into absurdity immediately before any conversation can ever be had. That sounded like his position. Do you think that's a fair summary, or do you think that's...
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary.
Okay.
So what about that do you not find convincing?
I think there's two things going on here. One, the ultimately skeptical position would be to say, well, just because we need to do something to have a conversation doesn't make that thing real. I think you could argue that that's a non sequitur, that just because this thing has to happen before we can have a reasonable discussion or live our lives doesn't necessarily make that thing any more real than anything else. Would be one way, although that's kind of boring. The second thing that I think has happened is it feels like there's been a redefining or a conflation of two different words or two different terms that are both called morality. I would argue that like making a choice to do something isn't the same type of morality as something being like good or evil. That like the normative statement of like we need to have this in order to do this, that normative claim isn't the same as like a moral claim of like this is virtuous or this is evil. I think those are two different things.
Okay. Okay, I guess the first one, I kind of agree that it might not be very interesting, but it depends what you mean by real, right? Like, I guess if I had to summarize my problem with these sorts of disagreements, we have no problem saying, like, for example, scientific truths or mathematical truths are objective. But it seems like these standards, when it comes to morals and values, like especially when you go down to the axiomatic level, like it seems like we desire something more. Like
real quick, so I would argue that there's a huge contextual difference here. Like if I were to say, for instance, like my video game character has more strength than your video game character, and that's just objective fact. Like that statement there, there's like a whole fucking philosophy of language here that I don't know enough about, but like that statement of like this is objectively true is going to be way different, or is going to carry much less like, I don't want to say authority, but it's going to mean something different than if somebody's having a discussion on like epistemology and they say this is objectively true, right? Like these two things are dealing with a whole other layer of what of like truths, I guess. I put that in quotation marks. Would you agree with that, or do you think that's not true?
Okay, well, I guess you have to start with your starting assumptions and the context in which you are going to make that argument. And then once you agree upon the assumptions, then there's objective facts about that framework. Like, you know, if you're talking about like anime characters, right? You agree that there's like, you can say like Vegeta is more powerful than Goku. And then as long as you both agree on relevant characteristics on how you guys define powerful in that universe or whatever, then you can actually have a real argument. It's not just so like all relative. But
I think with the argument you've given there, I think you've almost conceded the ground of like being an anti-realist to everything there. So you're essentially saying that things, or if you can tell me if this is not a fair summary, you're saying that things are objectively true, but only in relation to some aforementioned axiom. That things are only objectively true once we have an axiomatic foundation of which to build upon, and then those axioms themselves are by definition unjustified. So then we're kind of like, right? Go ahead.
Okay, well, I guess there's two types of axioms. This is where I found it really hilarious with that video where there's these two guys trying to come up with this polyaxiomatic theory.
Oh god, yeah.
There's an axiom where you're talking about like in the context of that conversation where we're talking about theoretical characters, but then there's axioms where just by rejecting them, you're self-contradicting. So, and I think that's what your friend was talking about when he says that you just basically it breaks down into absurdism. Like you can't even have any conversation at that point. And I think, and just as that is the breaking point when it comes to scientific questions, like for example, we have to assume axioms like the rules of logic are true. We have to assume that rules of causation is true, right? If you don't assume that is true, then it doesn't make sense. Like to reject that would be self-contradictory already. I think that when it comes to morals and because values precede morals, when it comes to values, there's a certain point, there is a certain breaking point where once you reject the foundational axioms, it turns into absurdity. Like we have to care about what's true, right? We already are ascribing a value to truth, and that is an unfounded belief, but that's still an axiomatic value that you have to start with. And then once you start from there, or just like how you define good or bad, once you start from there, then we can finally have a conversation objectively within this framework.
Yeah, so I guess like the question I have then is like, what do we mean when we say something is real? I guess then maybe that's like the whole disagreement.
It's very hard to
when I say
that.
that something is real. So I'm like a physicalist / materialist. I don't believe like in immaterial things. So when I say something is real, what I mean is that this is like a feature of the world. This is something that exists independent of human thought. Like it's just a thing that's it. Like it's a thing that is actually real. So when we have a when we have a conversation about like or no, wait, I don't even know why I define all of that. None of that is relevant to what I'm saying. I'm sorry. When we have a conversation about like whether or not we can know, we're not talking about if things are real or not. We're talking about if we can know they're real. If we're having a conversation about whether or not we can know something is real. So one thing, the analogy that I use here is like, so let's assume that like the rules of logic are true, right? I would say that like any conversation we have is going to be like a train leaving a station. And that if we start the conversation off with, well, maybe logic's not real, then the train is like falling into a pit immediately. Like we can't have a meaningful conversation without granting that, right? You agree with that, right?
Yeah,
of course. Sure. So like, but however, just because we need to make some fundamental assumptions to get the train out of the station doesn't necessarily make those fundamental assumptions things that we can know are real. It's just something we have to assume because we're humans, and that's just kind of like the boundary of human knowledge. Like we can't have meaningful conversations without assuming these things. But that in and of itself, that's a non sequitur. The idea that just because we have to have an assumption about something to have a conversation, therefore we make that assumption to have the conversation, therefore that thing is like real, or we know that thing is real. I don't think that logically follows. That was really wordy. Did that make sense?
Yes, but
Okay,
it doesn't get to the point of what we mean by real, right?
Okay.
Because in everyday language, right, in science, for example, we say things are real, but in the same, you can make the exact same argument for what you're saying with the train leaving the station, right? Like, how do I know that gravity is real? How do I know?
Sure.
We were still using real in the same way, and I would argue that when it comes to moral philosophy, you can make rational arguments and say that morals, or our morals, or these are moral or real in kind of the same way, because you still start from that foundation as well.
It feels like the difference, though, is that I don't think science, I think that the questions that we're asking right now fall like very solidly in the realm of philosophy, and I don't think science answers these questions. Like, I don't think science, and I could be totally fucking wrong here, but I don't think science generally concerns itself with things like epistemology. Science just takes all of that for granted and then begins its work. Like a scientist.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I would say things that are relegated to science are going to be like empirical discoveries, or things that can be reasoned past the point of epistemology. Well, let's assume logic is true. What are the three fundamental assumptions of science? Like, we can observe nature, we can make predictions about nature, and that nature is like consistent throughout the universe or whatever. That these are things that are just assumed, and science never questions these things. So I don't think that like the types of truth that we would find in science are going to be the same as like the types of truth that we would find like in morality, which are like philosophical truths, which are much heavier than like a scientific truth, is what I would feel.
Well, it's, I guess the values, the foundation, that's true. But everything that follows once you've built that foundation, I think you treat it the same way you treat any moral or any logical arguments. Like for example, that's what I hate to do this, but I might have to defend Sam Harris to a certain extent.
Go for it.
Like, this is what Sam Harris kind of tries to do. I think this, like, a lot of academics and philosophers have a problem with his book, but honestly, for the general public, I think it's pretty consistent for most people who are not philosophers. I think his argument in the moral landscape is good enough. Like once you've decided on your values, then and you've decided to take a utilitarian point of view.
You end up at Sam Harris, right?
Now moral states are relevant, and now you can actually do science and say true statements. You kind of like, it's kind of like, you know, taking hypothetical imperatives, right? If then statements. If you want this, then you ought to do this, and then those are facts, right?
I feel like the problem though is that like are you familiar with the term non-cognitivism?
Yes, but
I feel like that's essentially what we've done though, because we're basically saying like, okay, well, because like the hard part of morality, like normative ethics is fucking easy, right? Or it seems to be, at least. Normative ethics is easy. I want to be utilitarian, fucking easy as fuck. Applied ethics is fucking easy, okay? Okay, well, what's my stance on this given my normative framework and my meta-ethical framework? Meta-ethics is, in my opinion, not solvable by humans. I'm saying that really arrogantly. I don't have a background in philosophy, but it seems to be the case that meta-ethics is just not a thing that, it's an immaterial thing that we can't solve. But Sam Harris, my problem with Sam Harris is that it feels like he's saying that he's solved meta-ethics, but really what he's done is he's just made a bunch of assumptions like, oh, well, this is what's good or bad, from a non-cognitive point of view, like, oh, well, it feels like this is good or bad. And then it's like, okay, well, now let's do our like normative like frameworks after that. But like those are the burning questions. Like, is there actually like good or bad? Like, and how can we know what is actually good or bad? And that seems unsolvable to me, which is why I would be a moral anti-realist. Is the fundamental thing right here, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess it might be easy for me to just go with Sam Harris's argument.
Sure.
He actually does have an axiom. He does like do some sort of meta-ethical argument when it comes to his like baseline assumption, which is, I think it was something like the greatest possible suffering for all conscious beings is bad. And that's his starting assumption, right?
Sure.
And then, I think for most people, especially non-philosophers, I think that's a pretty good axiom, because say you want to reject that, then the concept of good or bad kind of breaks down. Like, if that is not bad, like, I don't think you can even have a conversation about ethics at all.
I mean, that's kind of true, but the problem, I feel like you are hardcore begging the question with that axiom. Like, you've already established your entire moral system within that one statement. Because when you say the greatest suffering ought to be avoided, then my question is, the first question I'm asked is, okay, well, what is the greatest suffering? And now we have to actually begin the work. Because and this has always been my critique of Sam Harris, because if I were to ask like a Muslim, what is the greatest suffering? You know, they might say like, well, you know, everybody engaging in sinful behavior, or a Christian, right? Like premarital sex, this represents suffering. But to like a hedonist or somebody who's amoral or somebody who's atheist, that might represent great pleasure, right? So how do we even begin to distinguish? Like, I feel like we haven't even begun to work on our meta-ethics by making this axiom. Like, this axiom is like literally begging the question of the entire system without doing any of the actual groundwork. That's what it feels like.
I think we care about suffering. Like, if you in most frameworks, in most like meta-ethical frameworks, or how people define values, I think for the most part if you like, I'm not a philosopher, but for most people it'll just break down to well-being and suffering,
for sure,
ultimately. And I think that's a reasonable starting point. And then after that, you can actually make logical arguments, just like you can make logical arguments from with math, with starting assumptions or starting axioms, right?
Yeah, but I feel like the starting assumptions of math. Let's see if I can say this. I feel like the axiomatic foundations that math give you are things that can be built off of, which you don't have to like further explore. Like, if somebody gives you like an axiom of math, like that's it, and then you build off of that. But for this axiom of like we ought to avoid suffering, I still feel like, how do you define suffering? It seems like you need to do more work there. Like, that axiom is only enough. That same axiom can get off like a million different moral systems, you know, from the start, right? Like, somebody could go jihad a million people and say, well, they're avoiding suffering by maximizing the good in the world, by following whatever religious doctrine they are. And then another person could literally be a doctor and is trying to save as many people, right? That same axiom can bootstrap so many systems. That's what it feels like.
I would argue, but I think like most people would argue that, I guess we have to assume that we're all meaning the same thing. We all mean the same thing when we say suffering.
But we don't. That's the problem, right?
But, well, I guess it's you can make a rational argument about like experience and suffering, like
Mm-hmm.
because the architecture of our brain is very similar because we all evolved this capacity for conscious experiences, and that you can map these onto real physical processes. Then you can look at two humans and say when they suffered, we mean the same thing when we mean suffering.
Sure, but like,
Um,
I mean, like, ooh, this is okay. I really disagree with this because now we're really getting into Sam Harris. Okay, so like here is a question that I would pose to you. Okay, let's say that you take two people. One person like reads a book or watches, you know, like some very good long form like documentary or whatever, and like enriches their life, enriches their brain, et cetera, et cetera. They're basically taking part in like long form content that is very enriching on multiple levels. And then another person browses the front page of Reddit all day long and gets those big dopamine hits, sees meme after meme after meme. Is there like an objective way to say one person is doing something better than the other person? Like, is there like an objective statement that we can make there? How would we even begin to do that? Which one is suffering or benefiting from what they're doing more?
Um, it depends on the degree of their conscious states, like well-being, like their, I guess Sam Harris would say well-being, right? Um, like we all have different preferences, but they all result in some conscious experience of well-being or happiness or whatever, which people distinguish from like pure hedonism. But you can, you just pick the term, and we can all agree to call it that,
Mm-hmm.
and that still maps onto some experience that you would assume can be is physical in the brain, and then you can actually say an objective truth about that experience. And like I said, like what you have to care about the experiences, but I would say the whole concept or good or bad or values just breaks down as soon as you say good or
Mm-hmm.
suffering and well-being conscious experiences are not relevant. As soon as you reject that, I think the concept of good or bad breaks
Well,
down.
it's not that it's not relevant. It's just that it seems really hard to ascribe like better or worse to one of these without some foundational starting axiom that is entirely derived from a non-cognitive point of view. So, like for instance, so let's use a better example. I could live towards 80. Like I could live to 80 years old and be very healthy, or I could live to 60 and I could eat junk food and never exercise, right? Which one of these represents an optimal brain state? You know, maybe the person that exercises and eats healthy is living a worse existence because they don't get to partake in as many bad foods and because they have to exercise more. But the person that eats, you know, really shittily dies earlier, and the end part of his life is worse because his health is worse. Like, we have to make some totally arbitrary starting point. Well, do we value health? Do we value longevity? Do we value, you know, the ability to eat bad food and be lazy? Like, what we choose to value there seems entirely arbitrary. Like, how could we possibly map onto the human consciousness in a way that gives us like what one of these things would be valued more than the other? How could we possibly do that?
I I don't think we can, like, just because we can't do that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that there's a fact of the matter that these conscious experiences are what we mean when we say good or bad. That's all I'm saying, and that and that you can actually say that it's objective. I think it's a different argument to say like there's a lot of things that science can't answer, for example,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's just pragmatically impossible under certain theoretical frameworks. But nobody questions about, like, nobody takes issue with the fact that we still call scientific facts objective facts, for example. So
Well, sure, but again, like I think that carries like different weights. Like a scientific objective fact is going to be much softer than like a philosophical objective fact, right? Like it's not like because it right. Do you agree with that or do you not agree with that?
um, I think they're both equally soft.
You
As
really
someone
think
who
so?
I think as somebody who does science, I
Huh?
think they are, like, because I think you have to start from the bedrock and then work your way up. But a lot, like, some people would argue, like, scientific non-realists, or
Mm-hmm.
one way of arguing against scientific realism is that science can never actually say what's real about the world. Like all the arguments that you made about morality, you
Mm-hmm.
can make exactly the same arguments against science, and people have, and they've said that it just allows us to do things. It allows us to navigate the world and use certain tools to manipulate the world, but we actually don't have access to the real world, right?
Sure.
So you never know what's real, and so like all of science eventually breaks down to some sort of relativism or pragmatism, and and most people reject that idea. But it seems like everyone kind of accepts that same line of argument when it comes to morals, and I find that kind of I feel like you're demanding more out of moral philosophy than you do when it comes to like philosophy of science or epistemology.
Sure, I understand. So let me deal with the first thing, and then we can see if we agree or disagree, and then I'll go to the second thing right down. So for the first thing, I would say that like the statements regarding like say we develop like a law of gravity, okay? That like these statements are just like making observations about things that fall to the earth, and this is a scientific formula. That observation is assuming so much underlying stuff that when I say it's a soft statement, what I mean is that like the hard work of like philosophy is not done by science there. So like I would consider like a statement like, if I drop this bottle to the desk, it will fall. I know it'll fall, right? That's like a soft observation. But if I were to make the statement like, things that I observe are actually happening in the real world, that is a much more difficult statement to prove. So I guess that's what I mean when I say like that philosophical assertion that my observations are representative or give me access to like the real world. That's like a really strong statement to make. But science doesn't concern itself with that stuff. It just takes that for granted, and then it moves past those hard questions. And then with all of those assumptions built in, it says, well, we can make observations. The real world is probably true, and then this is what we're going to measure in that real world. That's what it feels like to me. Do you disagree with any of that, or?
Then I guess. Okay, maybe it was just a
dictionary thing.
Misinterpretation of the way you're using the language. But okay. I think I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think we pretty much agree with that. But
okay.
I think like colloquially, like it's really, you would just have to say that your ethics or your morality is like how you apply them. It's not any more or less relativistic than how you apply scientific facts.
So like this is the part where I'm going to disagree with you. Okay, so the second thing that you said was that I'm applying an unfair burden to morality, because every statement that I make about morality, well, the foundations are arbitrary, it feels non-cognitivist, et cetera, you would say, well, the same could be said for science, like your starting point is science. And I literally just gave that argument. You're saying that science assumes all these things to be true, and then it moves on from there. Why can't morality do the same, right? Is essentially what you're saying?
And I don't think the just to clarify, but based on what I said earlier, I don't think that the foundations are arbitrary, right? I think they're necessary. Otherwise, you can't even, like, everything just breaks down to absurdity.
I agree with that. I'm sorry. When I say arbitrary, what I mean is like unjustified. But I shouldn't say arbitrary. They're not arbitrary. They're chosen for specific reasons. Because without that, things would be absurd. I agree.
Yeah. Otherwise, people will just make up polyaxiomatic theories.
Sure, I agree. No sense. So like my problem with this statement is that I haven't explored this as much, so I don't have like good words to use here. So I'm going to try not to jumble this too hard.
Yeah, that's fine.
You have like empiricism and rationalism. I think empiricism is like the idea that you gain information through like your senses, and and then rationalism is the idea that we're born with some a priori knowledge and we use that to piece together the world. It seems like if you combine our like a priori understandings, so like causality or these like really basic like fundamental logical statements, and then you take like our observations about the world, it seems like science will almost always, or it has to logically follow from that. Like the fact that I can make an observation and then I can plan that observation will occur again and again. This is like a combination of, one, relying on my sensory experiences that all humans seem to have, say for being blind or deaf or whatever. And that, two, it's using like some logic I've been granted, which all humans seem to have been granted. So like science is like the logical extension of our a priori knowledge combined with our physical senses. But morality doesn't seem to stem at all. So morality doesn't seem to have anything to do with our sensory perception, and it's only built out of kind of rationality, but it doesn't seem like there's any way to point to like one thing being better than the other, or one thing ever like doing something that makes it a better choice than another thing, without that being completely an appeal to like some emotional state. I guess is what I'm saying. Do you recognize there's a distinction there, or do you think I'm drawing a distinction where there is none?
Um, I think you are drawing a distinction, but I'm not really sure where the distinction is.
So like if I take like 17 different groups of humans and I put them on the earth, and I have all of them, I want all of you to begin scientific and moral explorations. I think that like given 20,000 years, given sufficient time, every single one of them will be able to come together and say like, hey, we all have our version of the periodic table of elements. That's something that will be shared across. Like if we find an alien civilization, I think that they will have some form of a periodic table of elements, because those seem to be properties of the earth, and it seems like the way that we understand that it is like a process that is shared among all humans. But when it comes to morality, it could be totally, some people could have like fucking random gods. Some people could just be like a hive mind where like, oh, we have no morality, blah, blah, blah. Other people could have like different philosophical, meta-ethical understandings. Like, but there's no way to say whose is better or whose is worse, because none of these are making statements about the world, or none of these have to do with like any observations they make about the world. It's just like, what do people feel are the best things, I guess?
I think maybe the confusion is that
Mm-hmm.
you're confounding the idea what's better or worse with what are values, I guess, because I think like for science, we still care about what's true. We have a value, to try to investigate whether something is true or not in the natural world. When you do science, you're ascribing a value to truth. For morals, I think we're doing the same thing. We're ascribing ascribing a value when we do that.
So again, the difference is I feel like science looks for things that are true, but like morality looks for things that are true with like a capital T. Like science isn't actually concerned with the idea of like, does this thing exist or not? Like, is this can in front of me actually like a real thing in the world? Whereas morality seems like it has to dig a little bit deeper, because we can't find, like, if I were to tell you to point to morality, you can't point to it anywhere. There's no place. Like this is like an immaterial thing that like exists in our head, right? Like there's no place that you can observe it or point to it. But I could do that with scientific observation, right?
I think science still maybe I shouldn't even use the word science now that I think about it. I guess when it comes to like empiricism and rationalism, they still, it seems like they have unjustified values at the bottom of it. They still have goals, and I think we should just treat morality or ethics or normative ethics in the same way. Just like, well, I guess normative ethics would be downstream. Just as science is downstream from epistemology, I guess. And so, I mean, when it comes to epistemology, would you say that you're not a realist, or you're
I'm like my position is real dumb. I'm like the ultimately skeptical position. Yeah, I would be like an epistemic anti-realist, but like and maybe this is like a vacuous distinction, but like I'm an anti-realist regarding all of these things, but I recognize that like, well, we have to assume these things to be true to have any reasonable discussion, right? Like I can't reasonably live my life as though like epistemic truth isn't like a thing, because it would be absurd. Or I can't live my life as though like, my sensors are like I can't gather sense data accurately. Like I'm not going to live my life like that's not possible. But like just because I need this to function as a human doesn't mean that these things are necessarily real or true things. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. Okay. I don't think it makes sense. I think like you can't even say what's real or true once you say that you have to grant this assumption to even make statements that are real or true. Because now you're using real or true, and I don't know what you mean by that. Like you think that there's another real or true beyond what we have to make our starting assumptions to even talk about what's real or true.
Yeah, so I guess my problem is that like as a human, like you can never know anything like outside of your perspective. So like how could you ever make a statement on something that's like absolutely true or absolutely not true? That seems like something that would be like outside of like what a human is capable of doing.
Yeah, well, I think that, yeah, I agree. But then
so then how doesn't that make you like an anti-realist in regards to like truth or like epistemology?
Because I don't think that that's a coherent view of truth.
But do you think something
once I define that, it self-contradicts itself. Like
well, but do you think that something being like non-coherent necessarily, like isn't our desire for coherency, isn't that resting on some like unjustified axiom as well? Like just because something is incoherent doesn't necessarily make it true or not true, unless we're restricting ourselves to like our own definitions. Like it all becomes circular, right?
Yeah. Well, okay. Maybe incoherent is the wrong word.
Well, no, I think it's a good word, but I think because I think it kind of exposes what's happening, right? It's like, so for instance, like somebody was like, well, how can you say that nothing is true when the statement nothing is true must be true, therefore you've self-contradicted, right? But what I'm not trying to get at that, like, well, I can't disprove truth within the system that we exist in, because I would have to step outside the system. But like that's my whole point, is that we're incapable of removing ourselves from like whatever perspective we have. So how could we ever self-validate this perspective? That was kind of wordy. Does that make sense?
I guess the whole concept of self-validating the perspective, it doesn't make sense. It's not even like it's basically it's not even a real question. Like you can't even interpret it in a way that's comprehensible.
Sure.
Because you have to start somewhere, right?
Can you say like so I'm like a big streamer guy kind of, right? And you're talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of cool. Could you tell me with absolute certainty that you're not going to wake up in like 5 minutes and this was kind of a dream? Can you be absolutely certain of that?
No, of course not. Yeah.
So so you're literally, your entire reality right now could be fabricated. So how can you think that you can make a statement of with regards to any absolutely true thing if you can't even trust like the reality that you're experiencing right now?
I think that when you talk about absolute truth, you have to talk about it within the constraints of the framework that we were discussing earlier. Like just you have to start in a framework, and then in that framework, then that's what we're talking about when we're talking about absolute truths or objective truths.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, but like I said, now why can't you like, by your definition, nothing can really be objective, right? Like it
not as a human, yeah, that humans aren't capable, because we have to function within some framework, and that framework can never justify itself. Like
then there's no reason to use the word objective or non-objective.
Well, but like, I mean, we do, because we have like different contexts for these words, right? Like for instance, like it's true that, does Gogeta come from SS? I don't remember. That like it's true that like Gogeta will always win in a fight against Vegito. Like that's true, right? We can know that. But like when you say true, what do you mean? Because neither of these characters actually exist. And it's like, well, yeah. Wait, so then it's not true? Or can I make like, we can both make true statements in regards to fiction, right? We can do that, right? Like it's true that Snape kills Dumbledore. Well, how can that be true that neither of those characters exist, right? Well, okay, but within like the framework of Harry Potter. So much the same way that like when we say things are true, like do atoms exist? Well, that gets into a weird thing. But like we can say like, like do the laws of logic exist, right? Well, sure, we can say that that's true, but only within the framework of our kind of like human existence. But we can't step outside and say like, well, if all humans were killed, like would math still exist? Or if all humans were dead, would the rules of logic still exist? Like, well, I don't know. I don't necessarily know if those things are even like features of the world. Like it's impossible for me to know that, because I can't step outside of my human framework to analyze these things.
I think what you call the human framework, I think that's what I'm talking about. Like everything that we talk about has to be within that human framework, and then you can say things are objectively true or not true. So
I agree.
I think it's like so I think it's completely. I think it's like it's not comprehensible. It's kind of like absurd to say that you're an anti-realist, because you have to talk about realism or anti-realism within that human framework that you were talking about.
I mean, I guess, but then it feels like we've kind of like taken realist or anti-realist to basically like if you're using those definitions, it almost feels like you're begging the question, like, because if that like, in order to be an anti-realist, you have to reject the very things that would make you an anti-realist. Well, therefore, realism is like the only valid position to take. I guess it just depends on like how strong the claims a realist make are. Because like if a realist wants to say, well, like this realism exists insofar as the human framework is concerned, well, I mean, like of course I would agree with that, right? Like I'd have to, right?
Oh man, I don't know enough about what real realists or anti-realists think. Maybe your friend will correct all the dumb things that I've said. But well, at least when we talk about it in everyday life, I think it doesn't make sense to call yourself a moral anti-realist or a moral relativist.
True LULW,
and I guess
true LULW, true LUL.
when it comes to downstream topics, right? Like it doesn't make sense when you're having debates about abortion or veganism, when you actually are talking about morals, to try to communicate your viewpoint as relativistic. I think it does a lot of harm on your position, and makes your argument less convincing.
Well, like, I mean, like, I kind of understand what you're saying.
Because it's just as objective as what anyone else would mean when they say the word objective.
Yeah, I agree with that to some extent, though. I guess like things like veganism are solved almost at the meta-ethical level, it feels like. Because, like, for instance, like, if one of your axioms or whatever in meta-ethics is like, you know, we ought to reduce the suffering of all sentient beings, which I think is like a pretty common like starting axiom for a lot of like philosophical stuff, or at least right. Well, if that's your axiom, I mean, like, we can jump from there. Whatever normative framework you choose, your applied ethics position is going to lead you to veganism, like almost always, unless there's some way that you like reduce the amount of suffering by like farming animals to feed people. Like, but that's going to be really, really hard to do, right? So like those questions are almost solved on the meta-ethical level. They're
solved at the meta-ethical level, or the conflict is at the meta-ethical
level. Like it almost feels like they would logically follow from certain like meta-ethical positions. Like if that's your starting axiom of like we ought to reduce the suffering of all sentient beings, whatever normative framework you apply, your applied ethics position is almost always going to lead to veganism. It seems like it would have to. So the hard questions are at the meta-ethical level.
Oh, okay. I don't agree with that.
You don't?
Yeah, if you want to move on to that argument, because I think even though I'm not really a utilitarian, I think I can make a utilitarian argument where for I guess non-veganism, like for meat eating to a certain degree.
What are you valuing to do that? That seems really hard.
And while you're still caring about well-being and suffering of conscious being.
Are we factoring in like the environment and stuff here, or? Because that seems like really hard.
It gets far more complicated when it comes to the environment. But yeah, you could make that argument too. Like there's people who go hunting or fishing, or they have their own they keep their own chickens.
But this is not how animal agriculture works today in the U.S.
No, it's not. But I think you can eat meat and. Okay, so you agree that people can be utilitarian and still eat meat, barring that they don't participate in animal or large-scale factory farming agriculture.
Almost certainly. So we can give the hypothetical of a deer hunter that's trying to cull like an overgrowing deer population in some given forest, or even somebody that like maybe scavenges food or something that like of dead animal carcasses or whatever. Like these people could probably consume meat in an ethical manner, assuming that we don't have assuming there are no other like ethical constraints. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess. Barring the whole sustainability, because ultimately that's you're just now weighing the pros and cons of like the ethics involving humans and not animals. I still think that you can probably argue from a utilitarian framework, you can defend eating meat.
Okay, I'm curious how. So let's say we start from. So we have a meta-ethical position of we ought to reduce the suffering of all sentient beings. How do we get to meat eating from there? I'm curious.
Okay. I guess there's two things. The first thing was everyone got really upset when you said that people are hypocrites if they're yelling at somebody for torturing a dog, but they eat a hamburger.
Yep.
You still believe that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think why everyone's so outraged was there's a difference between whether or not you're saying an act is moral or immoral, and then the degree in which you hold a moral agent morally responsible for the act, right? So you agree that there's a relevant difference between somebody, like say if you found out that your grandfather was involved in a bombing run in World War II, or that your grandfather murdered a family with a shovel. Like the consequences are the same from the utilitarian framework, but there seems to be a different degree of moral responsibility that you hold depending on those two situations, right?
Almost certainly, yeah.
Yeah, so I think somebody who says who is like really disgusted that somebody would murder their dog, would torture their dog, and they don't hold the same kind of moral reprehensible responsibility to eating a hamburger, because there's actually some relevant difference between that when you're describing moral responsibility.
So if we carry this analogy over fully, somebody might say Hitler was a bad person. However, a Nazi isn't necessarily a bad person, right?
You're trying to it's you're confounding the two differences again. Whether something is good or bad is a binary, but whether or not you hold someone morally accountable or the degree of the
okay, sure. Let me rephrase it. Sure.
Is on a continuum.
So let's say Hitler is bad level 10, and like a Nazi is bad like level 4 or 5. Like that's okay. Like they're still doing bad acts, but it's not the same level of agency as like Hitler. That's like directing them to do it.
Just like stealing is not as bad as murdering.
Sure.
Yeah.
My problem, though, isn't the agents. My problem is the action itself. Somebody that eats meat is never going to say, okay, well, somebody that's actually farming animals is bad, but I'm like a little bad, but not quite as bad. Instead, they say that the act of farming itself is okay, but the act of hurting a dog is not okay. So this would be the equivalent of saying, like, Hitler is bad and a soldier isn't quite as bad. But no, they're actually saying when Hitler kills Jews, it's bad. But when a Nazi kills Jews, it's okay. That seems to be like more apt to the comparison. Because,
it's not okay. I would not say it's okay. I would just say it's less bad.
But that's not what meat eaters say. Meat eaters don't say, well, okay, farming is still bad, but it's not quite as bad as like killing a dog. Instead, they'll say like, oh, well, I guess we're both saying what meat eaters would say, but I generally would think that meat eaters don't say like, well, farming is bad, but killing a dog is more bad. They say, well, farming is okay, but killing a dog is really bad. Like that, it seems impossible to hold those two positions without being contradictory.
I don't think the people who are really outraged at you would say that farming was. Their position was like farming is okay. They're
really?
Saying that. Well, I don't know. Not necessarily okay. I mean, I'm sure that they would, if they were rational, I should say. They would say that they wish it was not as bad as it was.
Yeah, but like now we're getting into some real like I wish that they would have like killed the Jews in a more humane manner. Like that would be the analogy, right? Like that's not an acceptable position to take. If you think that killing animals is bad, like, it should be bad, full stop. Not like, well, I wish we killed them in better ways, right? Like,
I think there's, like I said, the degree of the moral crime. Like, you agree that it's bad.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about degrees of moral crime, but meat eaters don't believe that a crime is being committed at all when it comes to animal agriculture. But they somehow try to, like, ameliorate it. They try to make it a little bit better by saying, well, maybe if we killed them in more humane ways. But that doesn't even make sense. Like, if you think that something ought to be protected, why do you think there's, like, a better, more humane way to kill it? Like, that's like the equivalent of saying, like, I think slavery is wrong. Or, like, somebody's like, well, I think slavery is wrong, but it'd be okay if they at least treated the slaves a little better. Like, well, that doesn't really make sense, right? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think it would make sense if somebody during the time of slavery said that slavery is wrong, but because we can't currently change it in any meaningful way collectively, it would be better than not if slaves were treated better. And I think
I can agree with that, yeah. But it seems like most meat eaters don't want that. Don't want like.
Well, maybe I think you're straw manning most meat eaters. I don't know. Maybe you're right. I mean, I could probably be convinced either way.
Well, I will say I will agree with you that if a meat eater wants to say killing a dog, and actually I would probably agree with that. That like killing somebody's like personal pet is probably, if we take a deontological approach, it's probably a greater moral wrong to do that than like to be somebody that eats meat from animal agriculture. I'd probably agree with that. But if a meat eater was like, okay, animal agriculture is wrong, it's bad, we shouldn't do it, but you know, like killing a dog is worse, I think that's an okay position. I don't think that's contradictory. I think that's okay.
Well, yeah. Well, they would say it's much worse to the point where you're justified in expressing moral outrage that people are torturing dogs, not in the same way that you're not in the same way that you would express moral outrage from somebody eating a hamburger. Like it's not hypocritical. Like so if you agree with that, then you'd have to agree that it's not hypocritical.
Yeah, if somebody had that position, I'd probably be okay with it. Doesn't I mean, I guess like both of us are dealing, or unless you've got like polling numbers, I'd be curious to see like how many people think it's, my guess would be that like 80% plus meat eaters think that like killing an animal for the purpose of recreational enjoyment of its carcass is a morally acceptable thing. I think most meat eaters would agree with that. Now maybe they'll quibble over like should it be humane or not, but I think that most meat eaters think that animal agriculture is a moral thing. I guess we would have to get like numbers, but that's what it feels like to me. I'm sorry, not amoral. It's a space moral thing. It's a moral thing.
It's morally acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that's a very defensible position. I think, and also I think I also wanted to point out that when we're granting moral status to animals, I think like, and if they care about well-being, suffering, then you have to care about like the conscious experience of the animals. And now you're ranking what the hierarchy of moral status for animals. So you would rank mammals higher than chickens, and chickens higher than fish. So now you can have there's a whole bunch of class of different types of meat eaters who can all still be utilitarian, but think that like the torturing of like chickens, or for example, might not be is not a immoral act, because if they can make the argument that chickens don't have the capacity to suffer in the same way cows and pigs suffer.
That would be an incredibly difficult position to defend, I feel. I don't even know how
why is it difficult to defend?
Because we're getting into so many arbitrary things. Like, what do we value at this point, and how can we even measure what we value? Like, if we want to talk about like the conscious, how do we compare the conscious experience of a cow to the conscious experience of a chicken when we can't even know the conscious experience of another human being?
But we already do it. Like, we already care about the conscious experience. Like, we already say that plants don't have conscious experiences, right?
Well, yeah, because plants like a CNS. I think that's a little different, right? Like,
yeah, but somewhere between plants and insects and other organisms that can respond to negative stimuli to the environment, there's a certain continuum, and we already draw that arbitrary line somewhere, right?
Sure, I don't disagree with that. I think once you get to like insects and like dumb animals, you're probably getting a little bit closer to like, well, hold on, this is hard to do.
Yeah, well, and people already do that. Like, for example, some places in Europe seem to care about animal ethics when it comes to bees and pollinators. So
just because people do it though doesn't mean it's a defensible thing, I think.
No, but I think we already do it though. So when you say it's very difficult to defend that, I think like society already accepts that. So I don't think it's...
Well, but hold on. This is a really bad appeal to social norms, right? Like if I say like, well, it's difficult to enslave like some black people, but not some white people, it's like, well, society already has slavery. Like that's not I don't think that's necessarily a good argument, right? Like I understand that some people already draw a distinction between certain types of animals, but that doesn't mean that it's like philosophically defensible, right? Or like morally defensible, right?
I guess I meant societally defensible.
Sure. Yeah. I'm still talking from like a philosophical division. From a societal definition, we already absolutely do this, right? Things like dogs and cats. Well, this differs in societies, right? Because some people think it's fucking disgusting that like some Asian people will eat like dogs, but like we, obviously we cherish dogs and whatnot. We would never do it. Or even like, is it Indians like don't eat cows? I think, right? Don't eat beef. But
I think so. Yeah. But I think it's you can like, just because we can't do it like pragmatically, like we can't measure like with fMRI or whatever mental states of cows and pigs and dogs and rank order them with humans, like just because it's impractical currently, we don't have the scientific knowledge to do it, doesn't mean that it's not morally justifiable. Like theoretically it could be if we had this information, right?
Well, no, that would actually be my point. So like I agree with what you're saying. Just because you can't scientifically do something right now doesn't mean that like morally we don't have like an obligation to do it, or we shouldn't do it at some point. But what I would ask is like, how do you even get to the normative statements of what we ought to value like over one thing or the other? Like at what conscious state do we begin to value things? Like let's say for instance we had the perfect ability to measure every conscious experience. Like how do we even decide what to value or what not to value? These seem like incredibly arbitrary assertions.
I guess like the intensity of the negative or positive experience. right?
How would you even like measure that intensity?
Like I said, we care about how strong or weak a certain experience is. Like that's where our values come from, and then when it comes to empirically, then we actually like that's a different question. You can't measure it.
Yeah, I don't know. That's not. That just seems like.
So we already have our values before that happens, right? Like I think you're conflating values and the implementation or the pragmatic implementation of those values. Like
well, I'm not even. I'm just curious.
Empirical evidence, and the other already requires an ethical framework to begin with.
Yeah, so I'm not so much taking an issue with like, well, how would you measure it? I'm just more like, what would you even choose? Like, let's say we could measure like the intensity of an experience, and we measure it between like 1 to 10, assuming we can even do that, and assuming how would we even decide what is intense? Like, what makes an experience intense? Is it like the fear, like how scared something is of dying? Is it like the physical response? How much does it try not to die? Is it like a stress hormone produced to the brain? Like, we'll ignore that. Would all have to be worked out. But let's say that we did figure that out. We had an intensity rating of like 1 to 10. What would you even choose as being like, well, once you hit 6, that's when it becomes morally wrong to do it. But at 5 and below, like that isn't morally wrong. I don't know. All of that just seems so incredibly arbitrary.
But that's like that's another form of begging the question, right? Because you already assume that we already know what relevant factors are what factors are relevant for negative or experiences or suffering.
But I'm assuming it because I'm trying to be charitable to your position. If I make you defend all of those, I think that gets even harder, because how could you possibly even choose what it means to have an intense experience?
I think that's a scientific question, though.
Well, no, that's a philosophical one. We would have to define that, right? Like, what does it mean to have an, like, in science, you're not gonna, or I could be wrong, but like, or you're a biologist, right? Like, I don't think like scientifically we can measure like the intensity of an experience. I don't even think science knows what an experience is yet, right? Like, this is like what we're researching right now. Yeah. So like, how could we scientifically define like this is an intense experience, right? We would have to value something, either a dopamine release in the brain, a fear response, the release of cortisol, maybe in the bloodstream. Like, we would have to like arbitrarily choose what we decide to like measure as like an intense response, right?
I mean, there's some weird, I guess like scientists have tried to do this. Like, for example, there's like the Schmidt index, where there's I work in entomology, so I study insects, and so there's a guy named Schmidt who stung himself.
Oh, the Schmidt sting pain index. Gotcha.
Yeah, and then he measures the intensity of the experience, and that's his objective, quote unquote, objective measure of a feeling of pain, right? So I would assume that if once we care about suffering, like scientists would do something similar. Like, I think in going back to our previous conversation, like whenever we do science, I think we embedded in a lot of our scientific like analysis and analyses and our theories are value statements, right? Like whenever you do statistics, you decide what threshold is biologically relevant to your goals, and then there's applied researchers who do what I do, and then there's researchers who just do things, just basic research, right? Like physicists who are asking more fundamental questions, and you don't get around ascribing moral values to what you're investigating. I think eventually it does boil down to values, and we just kind of take it for granted. But
sure. So I think like in physics, like especially like in really, really difficult like quantum physics, I wouldn't say you're asking moral questions, but you start to get to normative questions. Like the framework through which I view quantum mechanics is largely going to depend on the type of answer that you're trying to get. Like stuff like that. What you're referring to?
Can you elaborate on what you just?
So like when it comes to like interpretations of quantum mechanics, I think like a physicist might use a different interpretation based on the problem that they're trying to solve, even if that interpretation might have some fundamental contradictions with other interpretations of QM.
Okay.
So are those the types of like things you're talking about where you're saying like, well, even as a scientist, sometimes you need to make like a normative, some sort of normative distinction before you actually begin the work?
Or at the very least when you're analyzing the work. Like, like for example, something that biologists do is you eventually have to decide on a statistical model when you're doing an analysis.
Sure.
And then certain models will value, well, you know, certain models are better at evaluating something that you care about more than others. Like, do you care, like for example, scientists care more about reducing type 1 error over type 2 error. But in other fields, maybe.
Wait, what are those? I'm just curious. What is a type 1 error or type 2 error?
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you already covered this. So like a type 1 error is, this is like very, very basic statistics. So type 1 error is accidentally ascribing something to be true when in fact it is not true. So scientists want to avoid type 1 error. That's why they set their p-value to like 0.05, which is like 95% certain that if they run their experiment again, you're going to get the same result 95% of the time. Okay. So it's like saying you're allowing for 5% chance that if you of detecting a signal when one is not there.
Okay.
And then there's a type 2 error where you actually do think that there is a signal there, or it's the opposite. So you think that there is no signal when in fact there is a signal, right? So science heavily weighs upon making a type 2 error. So a scientist is more likely to make a type 2 error in their analysis when they're doing their stats, if they do like, say, like a very, you know, if they do this typical p-value thing.
Okay.
So that's why, like, it's part of the reason why there's like a publication crisis that people are talking about. Like for example, when you bias publication on positive results, like usually papers that have positive results are more likely to be published than papers that have negative results.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of already doing a filter where like say you actually detect a signal and you run an experiment. It could be that you're that 1 in 20, you're that 5% that's actually detecting a positive signal when one is not there. And then that gets published. But all the other 19 people that may have ran the same experiment, they got a negative signal and they did not get publication.
Gotcha.
And then if people don't communicate with each other, then people could be running a whole bunch of experiments and wasting everybody's time. So that's like one aspect of it. We're already heavily favoring one type of error over another. We're kind of like making a value judgment. I mean, scientists are aware of this. Like, you know, there's more to statistical analysis than p-hacking or doing power analysis or ascribing relevant p-values. But every statistical model, we have to take all these considerations. Like we have to care. Everyone has to make a certain value judgment, and it's different depending on the field and the goals of that field. So I think where was I going with this?
That scientists need to make some sort of normative statement or judgment before they can even begin to.
Yeah. So yeah, that's. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have to agree. I can't disagree with that, right?
Does it make sense though? Like, you could disagree with that. I don't know why you wouldn't.
Well, because to disagree with that statement would mean that scientists have solved like philosophy, right? Like
Yeah,
a scientist
yeah.
must necessarily make some normative statement before beginning scientific investigation, because there's no other way to know what scientific investigation to do otherwise. So you have to make some normative statement beforehand, right?
Yeah. So even when you're just looking at truth statements, everyone has to make a normative call.
For sure.
So what were we talking about before that led to that?
I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, we were talking about what we value when we're talking about suffering.
Okay.
And when it comes to moral, what's relevant, like like if we go from utilitarian framework and we're talking about the suffering and well-being of conscious animals. I don't see that as any different when you're making that kind of like judgment call of what is biologically relevant when we're talking about suffering and well-being. If you're measuring brain activity of an animal, like I think scientists
yeah. So
are
the
already
difference,
making that call.
I guess like the difference here is that it feels like I feel like not all normative statements are moral statements, but all moral statements are normative statements. So like if I choose one statistical model over the other, I'm not making the claim that this one is morally correct over the other. I'm making the normative claim that like this one will give me a result that more conforms to what I'm looking for here. Whereas with this
but what is the thing that what are you looking for there?
Whatever benefits whatever investigation.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a moral statement. That's all, whatever benefits.
But I think like, would you say that like, let's see.
Boston makes me.
This is incredibly ironic for me to say this, but like at that point, I feel like you've made moral statements vacuous because then everything is a moral statement, which I guess is kind of like Rum's initial argument, right? But like,
yes,
yeah, but I guess like I wouldn't say that like let's say that like I go to the store to buy like a Red Bull, or I say like I'm going to the store to buy a Red Bull. Is this a moral statement in the same way that like killing another person is wrong? Is that the same? Are these the same types of moral statements? I feel like they're not.
I think going to the store to get a Red Bull has values ascribed to it, right? So I mean,
yeah, but like one deals with a fundamental moral question, the other one just kind of like assumes it and moves past it. I feel like these are two different types of questions.
No, I think they all reduce down to values, right? So one reduces faster than the other. Like, like getting a Red Bull, you have to go through a lot of train stops before you go back to the initial station, right? But the killing, you'll get there a lot faster. It's not as far downstream. So I think that's the main difference. That's why I don't think they're all vacuous. I think you're kind of like confusing how close they are to the fundamental framework, the fundamental assumptions, and then just because they all reduce down to that doesn't mean that what's true or false or what's good or bad are vacuous, right?
I guess I disagree with that. I'm trying to think of how I can formulate a response to that. Like, let's say that we're programming. Let's say we're making a project, right? Like we're working on a project with 5 friends. Let's say that I feel like there are 2 different types of friends. There are 2 different types of people that could be working on this, right? So somebody says, hey, for this next part of our project, we need to program this thing. I think that for one person to say, okay, well, I'm going to suggest this, this, and this, and then for the other person to say, well, hold on, we shouldn't be using Java. We should be using like C++, or we should be doing a different framework. We should be using this, right? Like these 2 people are like addressing fundamentally different questions. And I feel like that makes like the types of like the type of question of like, should we like which framework should we use to like program a project in versus once we've decided on a framework, what's the best way to solve this problem within the framework? I feel like these are fundamentally different questions, and just because you can reduce one to the other doesn't make them all like interchangeable. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Like if I were to ask a question like, is murdering someone good or bad? Like that's fundamentally a moral question, but the statement of like, oh, I should go and pick up my kid from school, like that's not like fundamentally like a moral question or statement in the same way the other one is, even if it can be reduced to it.
I think they're different, but they're not moral statements, but they're all predicated on prior values that you have to take as a given. Like you have to assume them.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's all I'm saying. Like, I think, like I said, I think you're conflating morals and values, I guess.
Well, I'm trying to say I think there's a difference between the 2, but I don't necessarily.
2 statements.
Yeah, kind of. Wait. Okay. Wait. Hold on. Let's back up. So, what exactly is the question that we're investigating here? Because I think I've gotten lost now in the examples. Like.
Well, I think I don't know what you disagree with, but I think you were trying to point out what you were disagreeing with me on when it comes to I guess I was pointing out that.
Oh,
that,
so like if like a statistician, I think? Statistician. When if a statistician. Is that a word? Statistician.
Yeah.
If a statistician favors one model over another, I don't think that's a moral thing in the same way that one person might say like murdering is wrong. I feel like these are...
Okay,
Yeah.
I agree that it's not a moral thing, but both are predicated on values which have to be presupposed. Like if you reduce down to it.
Sure, I agree with that.
So I think, and I think morals and moral truths and scientific truths, like you can't separate them from unsubstantiated values, I guess. And I would argue, like, I guess, like, if I were to, as a lay person trying to argue, like, for moral philosophy, you could even say that, take the Sam Harris position and say that if you were to dig down at the very end of the day, everybody kind of has the same values. Like, everybody kind of, it seems like everybody cares about well-being and suffering to some extent. And if they don't, it doesn't really make sense. And so that's that's my defense of objective moral truths or objective moral statements.
Yeah, and I guess my problem with that statement is that feels like at the end of the day, you've fully embraced that feels like more relativism to me. But you disagree? Like at the end of the day, like I could go back like 200 years. At the end of the day, everybody knows that like the Negro is inferior to the white man. Like that's just something we all intuitively know to be true, or that a woman is inferior to a man. Like we just all kind of know that. So like a moral realist might say that like, well, intuitively, like we all know this is true, so of course it's true.
No, I don't agree with that.
Why do you disagree? Why is one intuition better than the other, aside from relativism, the fact that you're here now and you weren't there in the past?
Because if we care about well-being and suffering, then if you apply it to the past, then the same the same normative statements apply, right?
I guess, but then I feel like we're literally back at like the exact...
Just because you don't have access to them at the time doesn't mean that there's not facts of the matter about well-being and suffering.
Yeah, but we have to choose like whose well-being and suffering we care about, right? I guess this goes back to the very beginning of our conversation where I feel like well-being and suffering are like are not vacuous, but like you have more work to do. That doesn't actually state anything, right? Like so for instance, like a racist ethno-statist person and like a normal non-ethno-state person, non-racist person would both say, "Oh yeah, human beings shouldn't suffer," but one person wouldn't consider black people human beings, and the other person would.
Well, then I guess the argument would be whether or not you should consider black people to be human beings, and then now there's like objective facts like that you can use. And then you can, and if you want to say something like arbitrary, like skin color is what determines whether or not you are a human being, like I would say that's not a very, you can't rationally justify that position. Like why, it doesn't seem like there's any rational justification whether or not you should care about skin color. And
I mean, is there? I mean, even defining human being is contentious, right? As evidenced by like our abortion debates, right? Like what even is a human being?
I was about to bring that up too. Like I don't think, like for example, the moment of conception, I think it's just as vacuous as skin color. Like choosing or arbitrary. It doesn't seem to me that why should we care about having 2 copies of your genome, or why do we care about the moment of conception when you're ascribing the category of human or person, or ascribing personhood?
Sure,
right?
But then like what do we care about?
Well, what defines a human being? What is a good category that encompasses all humans?
I'm taking the you should know this. What's the scientific discipline that like categorizes species? There's a name for this.
Taxonomy.
Taxonomy, yeah.
Yeah, and there's disagreements with that too. There's the phylogeneticists who build phylogenetic trees based on genetic relationships. Yeah. There's the morphological taxonomists that go choose morphological features. There's the biological species concept where they determine whether or not species can interbreed and produce viable offspring. So yeah, there's categories and families, I guess, based on certain characteristics. And I would say that personhood falls within like that kind of type of category, the type of category that is like a family. Like you list a number of characteristics or traits, and if they have enough of these traits, then you can say it's a meaningful category or whatever.
Well, but you're taking the what did you say? The morphologist? Is that what they're called?
No, well,
Because that's morphology versus like a philo. Is it phylogenetics?
Yeah, but phylogenetics also pick characteristics. They just pick sequences of DNA.
DNA, yeah, sure. But like a phylogeneticist would probably agree with me, I would imagine, and then like a morphologist would probably agree with you. But at the end of the day,
no, a phylogeneticist still picks categories though. They just pick sequences of DNA as their categories.
Sure, but like I mean, like a zygote has like all of your sequences of DNA that would make you a human, right?
Yeah, but so does your skin cell, like and you can.
Yeah, but we can draw like a meaningful. We can draw like a good faith distinction between like a skin cell and like a zygote, right? Like a zygote has a potential.
Okay, hold on. Now that you're drawing a good faith distinction, now you have to list other categories that you think are relevant, and now you're taking my position where you think that there's more than one category.
Okay, sure. I mean, like I can.
Relevant.
Yeah, I mean, like I would draw some pretty basic categories that I would assume that everybody would know. So, for instance, like you have to be alive. So, like a zygote, like laying on the street is probably fucking dead or whatever. You would have to be like growing. So, like something.
Yeah. So we're now playing the same game, right? Now you already agree with me. Now we have to list and I just have to show that my categories are better than your categories when you're ascribing personhood.
Sure. I mean, none of the categories that I've just listed are categories that you're going to disagree with. But now, like, so now that we've got like the fundamental things out of the way. So, for instance, like you have to be alive and you have to be like growing, right? Like, well, what now? How do you get off of like the genetic definition into whatever category you're going to use?
Well, I just don't think they're like being alive, yes, but like when it comes to having both copies of your genome, right? Like that seems like a very that seems like a not a very meaningful characteristic, because you have living cells on your body that have both copies of your genome, but we don't ascribe personhood.
Sure, but we've thrown in a couple other axioms here too. Like a living skin cell is never going to grow into a person the same way that a zygote grows into a person, right?
Okay, a pluripotent stem cell then, which does not necessarily have to be derived from a zygote.
Sure, but those stem cells only grow into like environments that they're injected into. They're not going to grow into people as well, right? Well, or at least I'm not aware of like a stem cell being injected into something and then like it grows into a person. I don't think that happens, right? Stem cells are usually put into a certain environment and then they emulate the cells around them or whatever.
Theoretically, there's a type of pluripotent stem cell that you could turn into an egg, and or like with both copies of the genome, and then or an egg cell and then a sperm cell and then fuse them. I don't know.
I mean, I would say like if you're capable of creating a zygote, if you create a zygote out of a stem cell, then I would say, oh yeah, well then that thing is like a human. Like if you actually created like that human thing that was ingrained.
But then what characteristics of the zygote are important when it comes to being a human?
When you possess all the DNA to create a human, and then you're like a creature that's growing into a human, I guess.
Okay, so does that mean that? Okay, well then it has. Then you don't. Then you care more about not conception. What's it called? Or there's a difference between fertilization and conception, I think. Like one where there's a fertilized egg that has both copies and would grow into a human, and then there's that, and then there's those that attach to the uterine wall that can actually grow into a fetus.
Yeah, and Oh wait, you're not talking about like ectopic pregnancy. You're talking about like the different stages of conception, or the different stages of virtual.
Yeah. Because otherwise, if you cared about all fertilized eggs, then every time you have sex, there's moral consequences with that, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it would be at whatever point. I don't know. Maybe my woman's anatomy is bad, but I don't know like the exact moment or the name of the exact moment that it would be, I guess, like a zygote like takes root and begins to grow or whatever.
Yes. Okay. Well, I just don't think that that's a good definition of person.
Yeah, but then I have to ask you, like, well, what is your good definition of person?
Well, it like I said, it has to do with Okay, it's the same argument. This is what I mean when I say it's the same argument as the
Yeah.
veganism. Like you care about the conscious experiences, or the well-being or suffering of the moral agent in question, right?
Sure, but you have to have more than that, right? You can't just care about the conscious experience, right?
For what when it comes
To give like
moral
moral relevancy to something, there has to be something more than that. Or do you think it's just the conscious experience that matters?
Well,
Oh, here,
I
I'll
think
help you. I'm
once-
trying to
once-
ambush you. I'll
once
try
you
not to be a jerk. So, like, if you were to answer yes to that, then I would say, okay, so is it moral for me to walk up and instantaneously kill a sleeping person because they're not having a conscious experience at that point in time? And if it's not moral, then what's
that
different?
depends. It depends what you mean by conscious experience, because like people who sleep can have dreams and they have brain processes that are going on.
Brain process,
And
but we're
so-
not considering
and so
brain
the- and so the-
processes.
There is an experience. Okay, sleeping is itself an experience, right? Like
I
don't
mean,
know what
so
you
is
mean by
like
conscious-
floating around in a womb. That's a type of experience, right? Now, which types of experiences
Well,
are valued?
I would argue that there is no experience. If there's no brain when you're floating around in a room, then there's no experience, right? If you're just a cell, there's nothing like it is to be a cell, or just like there is nothing like it is to be a rock.
But what I mean, like, if you go to sleep right now and you have a dreamless sleep, you are essentially dying for 8 hours. You close your eyes and then you open them, and some amount of time has passed you're totally unaware of. If I were to ask you, what is your experience of that sleep, and it was a dreamless slumber, what could you possibly answer?
Well, we know that there's brain activity when you're sleeping.
That's we're not talking about brain activity. Before you said you want to talk about an experience. So I'm asking you, what is the experience of a dreamless slumber? This is like, you can't answer this, right? There's no way to answer this question.
You already presuppose by saying dreamless, right? Like
Yeah, of course.
and-
But people have dreamless sleeps all the time, right? People go to sleep and they don't dream and they wake up. Everybody's
yeah,
had
but
that experience.
you're like saying what is the experience of a dreamless slumber is like asking what is the experience of a non-experience experience. Like
Yeah, exactly.
That's your question. Like
It's impossible to answer. I know. That's why I'm saying, like, to talk about an experience seems like a really hard way to define life.
Well, you framed it that way, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
but I would argue that there is an experience when you're sleeping, like even dreamless experience, like even a dreamless sleep. Like some people would argue that maybe dreamless sleep is a misnomer because you just don't remember the dream that you had. But
Oh,
we
well,
can
now we're
measure-
getting into very strange questions. If something occurs in your mind, ooh, now we're getting into very, very strange questions. If something occurs in your mind, but you have no memory of it, did that thing actually occur at all? Of the only evidence
But
of
I
that
think
is-
there's something that you can measure, right, about sleeping experiences.
Well,
Like,
yeah, we measure REM
measure-
sleep. But if you're not
Yeah,
in REM
so-
sleep, you shouldn't be having a dream, so there should be no experience, right?
I don't know if that's necessarily true. I don't think we know enough.
Don't all dreams occur? I could be wrong, but I was under the impression that all dreams occur in REM sleep.
I think that was the impression, but I think I read somewhere that that's not necessarily true.
Okay.
So, but I don't know enough about neuroscience to speculate on that.
Okay.
But yeah, like supposedly there is something that it's like to be sleeping, right? I mean, you can make the argument for being in a coma or whatever, but now you need more than one category. Like I just named consciousness or sentience or having the capacity to suffer or have well-being, right? Like I think you need more than one category. Like one category is not enough. Just like for taxonomists, you need more than one
Sure, of course.
trait. So yeah, that's my position on it. Like
I guess it's
I
just
think-
hard for me to pick consciousness when, like, we can't even move past, like, the fucking high school or, like, solipsism. Like, we can't even prove that other people have conscious experiences like we do. So it seems really hard to use those in, like, a moral calculus, I guess.
Isn't it? Don't you think it's nonsensical though to say that the experience or suffering or well-being is not relevant when you're taking moral considerations? You care more about the DNA and the capacity to grow into a human.
Well,
Like, that
I don't
seems
know. I mean, it
very
depends on
strange.
what you value. I mean, like, a
That
religious
sounds
person...
Very strange to me.
But that's not an argument. Appealing to the queerness is not, like, an argument, right?
No. But like this is what I mean when our values break down, right?
Sure.
Because
like, a religious person would say, well, it sounds strange to me that you think that murdering a child is okay just because it doesn't think like you do, right? That's like what a religious person would very indignantly say that to you, right?
Yeah, but they care about a religious person just as an atheist would care about suffering and well-being when you break down their values into the axioms.
Sure, but their definition of suffering would include like sin. Like look at. Did you think we talked to Jesse Peterson?
I know, but I saw your debate with him. That's pretty great.
Or yeah, so like he believes that mankind right now is in a fallen state. So even people that go out every day and maybe they do drugs and then they fuck people recreationally and then they play video games, that these people are suffering. Even if they don't know it, these people are suffering. This is why I think like the term suffering is so worthless, or well-being is so worthless. Like somebody might see like great well-being through like a certain type of suffering. Like martyrs, for instance, are some people would argue going through the best type of well-being. The people that crash the planes on the World Trade Centers are going through like an elevated state of well-being because they're sacrificing their life for like a greater good or something. Or that somebody who's partaking in something that might produce a great deal of well-being. So like, for instance, I did LSD and I had a lot of fun, but my mom would say, well, you're suffering because you're committing a sin or you're doing something bad to your body. That's suffering. So it seems like those distinctions, like...
I think the word sin is kind of meaningless in that context because...
Well, it's meta-ethical, right?
Because you could just say suffering. Like you could just replace the word sin with another, like if you actually are suffering, like if you're actually doing some sort of psychological harm to yourself, then yeah, you could argue that it is.
But it feels like sin is actually a more meaningful word than suffering, because if somebody says sin, if somebody were to tell me, if a Christian were to say, I think that sin ought to be avoided, oh, cool. You've actually, like, assuming you're Christian, I have your meta-ethical framework now, and I know a lot about what you're telling me. But if you just, like, come as a random philosopher and you're like, we ought to avoid suffering, that doesn't tell me anything. I don't know what you mean by suffering. Like, that could mean a million different things, right?
Like I said, it's the Sam Harris axiom again. Like, you don't, as soon as you question, you can't question what the meaning of, like, once you question or deny the meaning, what it means to suffer, then suffering is bad. Like now you kind of lose the definition, you kind of lose the meaning of what bad is. Like,
well, but that's my whole criticism of Sam Harris. His axiom of suffering ought to be avoided literally to me sounds like he's saying bad things are bad.
It's not that suffering ought to be avoided. It's saying that if the most suffering for everybody of all conscious beings is not bad, then I don't know what you mean by bad. Like just like when you say like it's illogical to question the rules, to say that the rules of logic, to prove that the rules of logic through logic is circular reasoning. Like like it suddenly breaks down. Like you can't even say anything logical.
But that's all.
Like,
that's all Sam Harris is. Go ahead.
Just like how you can't say anything is bad. Like.
But that's all, that feels like all of Sam Harris' statements. Like we you know, like the peaks of human experience are like when we experience the most well-being, and it seems like he's making. So he's taking.
Okay, I can't defend.
Sure, but like this is my problem. It's like, and it feels like you're making a sort of similar argument. So Sam Harris might say the peak of the human experience, or like on the moral landscape, we can find these peaks, and that's where the well-being is maximized. And so his ethical position is he takes that descriptive position as the peak of well-being is like a good human experience, and he's saying we ought to pursue those peaks. But what you're basically telling me is like, this thing is good, and since it's good, we ought to do it, which is totally circular and totally vacuous, right? Like, of course, the peak of human experience is like the thing we ought to pursue, because that's the most good, and we ought to do the most good, because by definition, good is what we ought to be doing. But what is that peak? What does that peak look like? That's the hard question, is my problem, I guess, which is kind of like what this whole conversation is about.
I think you have two problems. Like the first problem is, so your first issue is this. It seems like there's a circular logic or begging the question when you're defining good or bad. I would say that you have to treat it the same way you treat logic or truth.
And then my problem with that is that
it's not, and that it's not. And then I have one more thing to say. And then the second problem is whether or not you can even obtain, like whether or not it's even pragmatically possible to find out what those peaks and valleys are, which I think I would agree with, like that second.
Yeah, I guess like we're kind of retreading old ground, but like this is my old disagreement is like I don't think that a moral truth is the same as an epistemic truth. I totally reject this thing because I think that like epistemic truths can lead us to make observations like in a world that we relate to via like senses. Like for instance, if I follow from epistemology, if I establish some fundamental logic and then I use my senses to gather data about the world and then I combine those empirical measurements with my epistemic truths, I can start to generate predictions about the real world that I can also observe. That process is
You're
totally...
just making an argument for pragmatism, though.
Okay, wait, what does that mean?
You're just making an argument for pragmatism. So you're just saying that I can, through sense experiences and you know logic and the rules of logic and inductive and deductive reasoning, I can do things with science that I can't do with moral philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah. So. But that doesn't mean that they both have the same kind of axiomatic framework, or it doesn't mean that they one is more one says more truths about the world than the other.
Oh, of course, but I'm already like an epistemic.
More than one is credible than the other.
Sure, maybe I'm a pragmatist then. It's another label for me. But like,
well, then you'd be like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson basically an insane pragmatist and doesn't even think that there's any truth.
No, how do you get to like some Jungian archetypal bullshit from pragmatism?
Well, he's like, well, that's why he had like a 2-hour argument with Sam Harris, right? They don't agree on what's true because
but
Peterson
the problem is, but that's embarrassing for me to admit it. But like Sam Harris like got fucking crushed in that conversation because he doesn't know anything about philosophy, and Jordan Peterson seems to know at least enough to destroy Sam Harris. But like in that conversation, that every single time Sam Harris tries to talk to a philosopher, in my opinion, I've seen it happen 3 times. One was with a physicist, Sean Carroll. The other was with Jordan Peterson. And then the other time was with Daniel Dennett, I think. And in every conversation, Sam Harris, I don't even want to say he looks like an undergrad. Like, he looks like a high schooler to me. Like, he literally
He has an undergraduate degree in philosophy, doesn't he?
Supposedly he does, but then again, so does Trainwrecks. So, I mean,
Oh, really? I don't know.
Yeah, he does. He has a VA in analytic philosophy. I don't know how, but he does. But yeah, but like it literally looks like Sam Harris. Like it looks like, I don't even want to say a Redditor because like a lot of Redditors like on like the philosophy subreddit seem like they know their shit. Like Sam Harris seems totally. Have you seen him like have like a convincingly good argument in any conversation with somebody else that like is studied in philosophy? Because in those 3 conversations I've seen, it was embarrassing. Like Jordan Peterson, like I don't think razored it was embarrassing, in.
But I think there's a lot of problems with how Sam Harris communicates his point of view, and I don't understand half of the issue, like his arguments when people have issues with them. I try to be charitable to what he's trying to say, but
but anytime you try to be charitable, you try to be charitable. Oh man, dude, have you seen his discussion with Sean Carroll?
I don't remember.
Okay, it's so good because like Sean Carroll tries so fucking hard to make him not be a fucking moron. But Sam Harris wants to make statements that are so much stronger than what he makes. Sam Harris wants to say, no, listen, I have solved meta-ethics with neuroscience.
Okay, what was his disagreement with Sean Carroll?
Sean Carroll basically says, listen, you're totally making these arbitrary valuations of what is good or what is bad, but that's okay. Let's just do that, and then we can answer interesting questions. But Sam Harris would absolutely not give that point. He's like, no, you're wrong. I've solved what is good and what is bad with neuroscience. But like, and then Sean Carroll,
I don't think Sean. I don't think Sam Harris was saying that. I think Sam Harris just says it's kind of like my position. Like it doesn't make sense when you say that suffering and well-being are not in the calculation when we're talking about what's good or bad.
Oh man.
The concept of good or bad breaks down. So because that's meaningless, let's just start with that, and now you can start making normative statements through science.
Here's like a quick question I have you. Do you believe that you can generate oughts from ises or no?
No. The David Hume argument is airtight. You cannot do that.
Wait, well then how are you more realist?
because I think you have to you just have to start like it's the starting point of values. Like
to embrace more, okay, and I could be totally ignorant here, I totally admit, but to be a more realist, don't you essentially have to say that we can start getting ought statements from is statements somewhere? Don't you have to do that?
No.
Okay, how?
because
Or can you give me an example of a moral statement that isn't an ought
we
when
are.
it is?
It's what your friend Rem was trying to say.
Mhm.
You have to make a value statement when you're making is statements already, and
Yeah,
just
but
in the same way, you have to make a value statement to create ought statements. Both
That makes like a
start at
it feels like
they're
a
both
cheat.
like you can't translate one into the other, which is why David Hume's argument is airtight. But
I feel like
you
that's a
both
cheat
have to
code. Like
start at a-
if you want to start with that, then I can grant you that. But now your definition of what is a moral statement has become severely weakened. Like, and we're not even at moral statements yet. I think we're just at like normative statements. Like, if your argument for moral realism is that, well, in order to even have a conversation about truth, well, we have to want to have a conversation about truth, and that desire to do so is necessarily a moral desire, and it's a moral statement as it's like, okay, well, in that case, literally every single statement ever is a moral statement, but that still doesn't get us to the type of morality we're talking about when we say like murder is wrong. Like that type of moral statement is way different than, hey, we ought to investigate epistemology, right? Like we're using the word moral for both, but one is clearly different than the other, I think.
Both are statements of value, though. Like both are predicated on values.
Yeah, but every value statement isn't a moral statement. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that? That like all normative statements are not moral statements, but all moral statements are normative statements. Do you agree with that?
Okay, let me.
Sorry, yeah, this is.
What do you mean by? Okay, I think you're.
So like a normative statement might be like, I need to run 100 meters to finish this race. That's like a normative statement, but that's not a moral statement. The same way as like running this race and winning is good. It would be like virtuous to win this race or something. These are two fundamentally different types of statements.
I don't know what you mean by fundamentally, but
that like one is talking about morality and one is just like a condition to satisfy the other. Like, I need to fill this glass with water in order to make the glass full. Well, like, in order for the glass to be full, like, that's like our normative statement is like the condition of the glass being full relies on this thing happening. But like a moral statement, like, well, it would be morally virtuous to fill the glass. I ought to fill the glass. That's one is a moral statement, one is a normative statement. But fundamentally, these are different things. They address like different types of questions.
At the face value level, I agree. But like filling your glass of water, like the fact, like if you know, you can keep digging deeper as to why you care about filling a glass of water, and ultimately, like your desire to fill a glass of water or your desire to not murder somebody or whatever, like they're all predicated on values. Like I don't know, I don't really understand. Like I have trouble understanding what exactly your problem is here, because like
I understand what you're saying.
It seems like we agree on almost everything.
I feel like our problem are words. I feel like we're getting tripped up on words right now, because when we're agreeing, like when you say everything is predicated on values, I agree. But when you use the word values there, that's not the same type of value as a moral value, right? Like my value for some, you know, like, well, what are your color character values, right? Like if I'm entering color codes, right, and I need to get that 6-digit hexadecimal thing, that value is not the same type of value as like the value of taking care of your parents when they're in bad health. That even though we're using the word value for both, these are fundamentally different types of things that these words are addressing. They're totally different values. So like when you say, well, there's a value statement when you choose to believe in truth, then that quote unquote value is far different than the quote unquote value of like the 10 Commandments. So these things are fundamentally different, even though we're using the word value for both. That's what it feels like to me.
Well, in your example with the I don't even know what it would even mean to hold value with the 10 Commandments, but
like your moral statements, like these are things are virtuous. These are value, like these are good values versus bad values or whatever.
Okay, well, I think you would argue that finding out if things are true, or being able to, you know, use science or find out, and finding out true things allows us to do things like that's like those are value statements. Like,
yeah, but so like okay, we're close.
In the same way that it's good or bad.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, no. We're really close. So like this is a normative statement. Okay, if I want to do things in the world, I need to investigate science. Okay, however, I ought to do things in the world. That's a moral statement. Unjustified, totally different. I ought to do things in the world is much different than, in order for me to do things in the world, I need to investigate science. I think these are two fundamentally totally different types of statements. Do you think so, or do you disagree?
Okay, can you say that again, the first thing before the ought statement?
Sure. So like the first thing is in order for me to do things in the world, how about like in order for me to have a computer, to make a microprocessor, I need to investigate like scientific things, right? However, saying I ought to investigate scientific things so that I can have a microprocessor, these are two fundamentally different statements, with the second being totally arbitrary and whatever, and the first just being like a normative statement that we can build up from like epistemology.
I think, okay. I think ought, maybe it is a language problem. Okay, so I think whenever you're making ought statements, you, in a roundabout way, you're kind of making statements of the type that you're making with your first sentence. Like, I ought to do science. Like, if
yeah,
I
it's
want,
our language.
It's like a hypothetical imperative or whatever that Kant called it. Like, if I want to make a microprocessor, I ought to use science to do it. And that's a kind of like an objective normative statement, or you can say there's an objective.
Sure.
There's something objective about that statement,
yeah,
right?
Because that literally just comports to like epistemic stuff. We don't need any sort of moral declarations to get that statement working, right?
Yeah, and so when it comes to things like I ought not to murder my best friend, right? Like, if I care about, so it's kind of like, so saying I ought not to kill my best friend is like saying the hypothetical imperative. If I want to live in a world, where I maximize my well-being or happiness or whatever, then I should not kill my best friend. Like, and then that you can say that that's objectively true, right?
Yeah. Hold on. That's a lot to think about. I got to think about that. To restate your argument, so I'm saying that if I, in order to finish this race, I ought to run 100 meters, and I'm saying that that's like a normative statement, right? I'm saying that's a normative statement, yeah? And then I'm saying that that's fundamentally different from saying I ought not murder my parents. But you're saying, well, hold on. You're saying you ought not to murder your parents because that comports with your maximizing the well-being of the universe. So what you're really saying is like, you want to, in order to maximize like the well-being of all of civilization, you ought not to murder your parents. So actually, it's the same type of normative statement as the race one. That's essentially what you're saying, right?
Yeah, and I think to a certain extent, all people, when they say you ought not to do something, or you're using that hypothetical imperative structure.
Yeah, I guess
want
like
to say it's objective. I don't know if this is like, I'm sure your friend is just gonna completely attack me or whatever if you talk to him about this. I think this might be a certain subset of anti-realism or relativism. I think there's a difference between in philosophy. There's a difference between relativism and subjectivism.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember what category this falls into, because I don't think Kant was a moral anti-realist, for example, but he talked about hypothetical imperatives, where you have if-then statements based on your desires. But I think but I would just go back to the beginning of our conversation, where I think scientists, like, you have a value statement, like you have to decide to care about well-being and suffering, right? Just like how you have to care about what's true or what's useful.
I guess like the difference is
science.
like, and I don't have the background to discuss this. I feel like I have a feeling that there's a meaningful difference here, but I don't think I can like debate it well. But I feel like there's a meaningful difference between the two types of paradigms, where like in one, I need logic in order to do things in the world, versus the other where I need some moral truth in order to make moral statements about the world. And I don't know, maybe I'm appealing to pragmatism or empiricism too much, but like in the former, I can supplement this with my sensory experiences of the world so much. Like I can use epistemic truths, and then I can apply my observations to those truths to generate things that I consider to be true about the world. I can do this and I can observe it in such a powerful way that seems to reinforce that, so that I know that like these observations are comporting with all of my like fundamental axioms and everything. Whereas in the latter world, in the moral one, where I like that, those moral foundations can be so different from one person to another. You can have a transhumanist, you can have a religious person, a Christian, you can have an atheist, you can have a Kantian, moral realist, like all of these people.
But can't you you said you can objectively verify it in the real world, but can't you objectively verify like the importance or your values when it comes to suffering and well-being? Like you can like experience suffering firsthand, like you can experience it yourself, and then and that's like salient, that's verifiable. Like you can put your hand on a hot stove or whatever.
Yeah, but like that, no. Oh, okay, yeah. So like
something.
the problem is like I don't like these are like the Sam Harris examples, right? Like hand on a hot stove or like acid in a face. We can agree, probably. I think. Well, no. I mean, like in some ways, we can agree that like causing physical suffering is generally not good. But even at that, like, should we should you exercise? Like that represents like a physical suffering typically. Like exercising is generally not pleasurable, but it produces a greater effect on the body at the end.
Okay,
so like
this is actually really good actually, because it's the same thing when it comes to health sciences, right? We have this concept of good health is kind of like the same kind of concept as well-being or mental well-being. And same with psychology, right?
Although even at that, we've had trouble with that lately, where like people are now looking at health a little bit differently. So for instance, we used to be obsessed with longevity, but now we don't care so much as how long does a person live. We care how long does a person have a healthy life, right? Like living to 90 doesn't matter if the last 30 years of your life are miserable. Yeah,
and we're making value statements and value judgments there. And I don't see a problem with that. And we don't say that health science is all relativistic or non-objective.
Correct. Although these are things that are still just like maximizing the well-being that we're talking about is literally like a physical thing. But when you get to like more like immaterial things, like is premarital sex wrong? Is murdering somebody wrong? I feel like these are much harder to establish.
I think it breaks down to physical things though. Like murdering somebody has like a physical consequence, like in society or to the individual. Like same with potentially when you're talking about premarital sex, you have to care about that too.
I mean, like, well, but that's not generally people that take a deontological approach don't care about that though, right? Like these things are wrong, but Kant, right, who you cited before, like would argue that these things are wrong in and of themselves, that like categorical imperatives exist, and these are right or wrong independent of like their consequences in the real world, right?
Okay. Well, it's very hard for me as somebody who does not study Kant to say what he thinks. But
okay, well then we can fuck him, ignore him, fuck that guy then.
But there's a difference between what he calls a hypothetical imperative, the if-then statement, and the categorical imperative, which is just goods in of themselves. But he's argued that he reasoned his way to get to those statements. So he had to use like some form of rationalization to get to those statements, in the same way that you have to use you can like synthetically rationalize mathematical truths or mathematical statements to derive true statements from math. He thought that you could do the same thing when it comes to his categorical imperatives. But the if-then statements, the hypothetical imperatives, are not the same thing. It's just like once you decide on a goal, then you say, if I want to quench my thirst, then I ought to drink this water. Like that's different.
Okay. Listen, can we just say fuck metaethics?
Fuck metaethics, but
it feels like
okay, you can say fuck metaethics, but what? Like I don't know why you want to hold on to this moral relativism or this.
Listen, man, how long ago did Kant write his bullshit? Was this like in the 1800s? 1700s?
I don't know.
It was like the 1700s, and people like, listen, here's the fact, okay? I'm going to drop some facts on you, okay? Humans can't answer these questions. Morality is immaterial. There are no good answers here. Fuck all this bullshit, all right? There's your hard, ultimate skeptical truths, okay? Fuck this shit.
But I think like if you take that attitude, you're doing the same. It seems like you're doing to morality and ethics what you don't do to epistemology or philosophy of science or science.
I guess it's maybe my normative framework is informing my metaethical framework, which is maybe wrong. But I mean, like as kind of like a consequentialist, like I see so many bad things that come from like moral realist frameworks that it makes me want to avoid them a lot. And like, if you have assumed certain axioms,
hold on. You already said bad things, though. You already said bad things. Like, you already presuppose the moral realism framework once you say that. Like you already said, like once.
Yeah,
you're
let me rephrase that. Let me
consequentialist,
rephrase
you
that.
think it's relevant that things are bad.
Yeah, let me rephrase that, I guess, okay? And you can argue that this is a value statement, but it's different, okay? When we talk about like epistemic truths, or we talk about like scientific frameworks, many different people all across the world, all across human history, can come together and agree that these frameworks will consistently point us in one direction, or will converge, hopefully, on some sort of truths about the world. Moral statements, we still believe in things that are thousands of years, 2,000 years old. We've gotten biblical statements that haven't been updated or changed at all. And these point in radically different directions with no sense of converging on anything. No, like, so I guess...
don't agree that there's any moral progress? Because if that were true, then there'd be no moral progress. I
don't think there is. Oh yeah, let's get our postmodernism. Yeah, fuck that. I don't know if I necessarily agree that there is moral progress. I don't think so. Because in order to believe in moral progress, I would have to be a moral realist. So no, fuck that.
Oh my god. So you are like Jordan Peterson postmodernist.
Jordan Peterson is not a postmodern. He's a fucking tradcon. There's no way.
No. Ironically, I think Jordan Peterson is a postmodernist because he doesn't believe in like scientific realism or things are true outside of whether or not they're useful. Like he thinks it's just all pragmatism.
Maybe. So, I've actually heard him say things like that before sometimes. Peterson is like so confused that I don't know what he actually like believes in. I'm not sure.
That's why I think it's bullshit that people think that he has anything to say.
Yeah, he has like no concrete beliefs at all. Yeah, I don't know.
So you disagreed that what you said.
Well, but like I'm sure that like there are a lot of conclusions I share with a lot of other people that I would consider to be using like really dumb thought processes, right? Like I don't really care about Jordan Peterson's conclusions if like his process to get there is like fucking absurd, right?
No, but that's the starting point though of your attitudes towards your attitudes when it comes to where you form your values.
Sure, but like on what metric? Sure, this is a good question, Chad. On what metric would you even define like moral progress through history? That sounds like such an insane.
Well, I think. Like I said, I think people just, if you boil it down to it, people ultimately just care about well-being and suffering.
Sure.
But
that doesn't make it a moral truth, right?
If you measure well-being and suffering in society, then yeah, I would say that we have made
Okay, so here's
progress.
a question.
Or you could. I'm not going to say you can measure.
Here's a question. Do you believe that like an ant colony can make moral progress?
It would depend if there's well-being or suffering involved with ants.
Well, we could probably say that like ants that are like healthier and like the queen giving birth to more shit and getting larger seems to be the goal of like an ant colony. So would like an ant go ahead.
Yeah, but you have to assume that the ants you have to ascribe values already, right? Like how close is an ant to a blade of grass or whatever? Is it just like a biological machine, or are there experiences and desires and
I don't fucking know. Fuck the ants then.
Things are relevant when it comes to morals.
To you they are maybe, but like okay.
No, but all of society it is.
Let's fuck the ants, okay? You just said that there's more progress. I should have got you on this one. You said that there's definitely been.
I did not.
Oh, you don't agree there's been moral progress?
Oh, no. Let's just... Okay, say what you're about to say. No.
Do you think there's been moral progress? Because I think if you say there's been moral progress, I think that makes you the ultimate moral relativist in a way. Because you're basically saying that, like, well, because you exist now, our morals are the best they've ever been just because of the time period you're in now. Like, whereas, like, other types of people with different moral systems, like conservatives in the U.S. would say, well, we're not making moral progress. Roe versus Wade represents regression. Gay marriage represents regression. The amount of premarital sex and drug culture today represents regression. Those people say we haven't made moral progress.
Okay, let's go back to your train stop analogy.
Go.
I would say that everybody, all humans, like even conservatives who talk about sin and Jesse Lee Peterson, if you follow their train all the way back to the first stop, it ultimately starts at well-being and suffering. And I mean,
even I would agree with that. Sure, yeah.
And once you grant that well-being and suffering, it doesn't make any sense to talk about ethics or morals outside of the framework of well-being and suffering, then yes, you can, theoretically you could say that we've made moral progress, even if there's like...
Well, but then we come back to our very fundamental thing where what do you define as well-being or suffering? Because some conservatives would say gay marriage represents suffering. Like even the two men or women getting married to each other are suffering. They just don't know it.
It doesn't make sense to it has to map on to some sort of mental state or
No,
experience.
it doesn't. That's a
suffering.
value statement. Why does it have to map on to like some sort of conscious experience? Like, why can't we get this from the immaterial, from things like the Ten Commandments? Like when we have our immaterial information.
Because a rock can't suffer, right? Like that's like and a rock can't.
Yeah, but like people could suffer like in a spiritual way without being aware of it. Like I would argue that every religious person has to be some kind of dualist, right?
I don't think it makes any sense for the like
to have spiritual suffering. You don't think religious people believe in that?
I don't think they have very good arguments for or they haven't made a coherent definition of what it means to spiritually suffer outside of like your own consciousness. Like that doesn't seem to make any sense.
Well, this is like, yeah, so I'm borrowing again a term from chat, right? So this is kind of like, this gets into a discussion a little bit on metaphysics, where the idea that like things that are like not physically in your body can be suffering. So things like your spirit or your soul, the fact that you can suffer past death.
But isn't that a conscious experience? Isn't that in itself a conscious experience? If there's no experience of like suffering is an experience, right?
Well, like, wait, the conscious experience of a soul, like an angel or a devil, or like somebody going to heaven or hell?
Yeah, you have to a dualist would have to believe, or not a dualist, but like a religious person that believes in a soul would have to believe that there's some sort of consciousness outside of the physical world, but nevertheless, they still care about conscious experience of suffering and well-being.
I guess, but I think that,
right?
Well, I don't know if they would, because they would argue that there's something separate from your I guess we're getting to like weird, like how do we define things? Like, is your soul part of your consciousness? I'm not sure if people would say that or not.
What do you mean? Like, but then what do you mean when you say the word consciousness?
I don't fucking know. Ask a religious person. But
well,
no,
that's why I said,
religious person fundamentally believe that there's a different, like for instance, like people that believe in reincarnation believe that souls transcend conscious experience, right?
I just think that religious people are confused. Like they don't.
Well, that's because you disagree with their meta ethics and their metaphysics.
Just like you're how I think you're confused.
But like actually, oh my god, this is actually the perfect example, because if we go back to that train station, maybe we were wrong in the. Actually, I might have been wrong in the train station thing. Your argument initially was that we agree with well-being or suffering in order to get the train out of the station, right? However, this kind of like epistemic polarity occurs with religious people, because they'll say to an atheist, "How can you be moral at all without being religious? It's impossible." For their train to even get out of the station, they need to have like an immaterial figure like a god that grants the ability to make moral statements. Their train can't leave the statement without some sort of god. So it seems like we're literally having like foundational disagreements on where morality even comes in.
Well, I think that their position is not defensible, because if you argue with them like kind of like in a dialectical manner, eventually it'll boil down to well-being and suffering, because you can set up the argument, like God, like what if God decided that the maximum suffering for everybody would be good? Would that basically define what's good? And then they have a useless moral system at that point.
Well, but then I mean, like it seems like these arguments are, I'm not saying this like in a mean way, but it seems like these arguments are just attempting to play word games, right? Like if God defined bad as good, well then bad would be good, and those would be our new definitions. I don't think that you win that like by way of like
you have to, the fact that you said that meant that you acknowledge that the maximum suffering for everybody is bad.
Well, yeah, but the maximum suffering for everybody wouldn't be what God would want, because God is good.
Then you're kind of like, God is superfluous at that point, because that.
Well, of course he's God.
Because now you're ascribing a moral system that's outside of God, right? If God is what defines the moral system, then you can't just say that God is good. You either have to bite the bullet and say if the maximum suffering for everybody is what God wants, or what He defines as good, then that is what's good. Well.
Yeah, but they would say that God, but when they just answer that God would never do that?
Well, but then if they say God would never do that, then that means God has moral values above, that's not definable by Himself, right?
Well, like, God, wouldn't you just say that
there's
God...
some moral system above God if you have to presuppose that God has to decide what's good that's independent of what he chooses, good or bad.
I guess like God would make decisions, and God would decide like what is good, because God is the source of all things. If God were to decide that bad is good, then bad would become good. But I don't see how that devalues what God has decided if you're religious.
The fact that, okay, can you say that again?
You're basically saying like, well, what if hypothetically there was a malevolent God? Then a religious would say, oh, well, then I guess God would be malevolent, but he's not.
Well, they would have to say that, but I don't think they would.
Well, I was religious for a long time. I could say that.
Well, you would say that it'd be fun, like God would be malevolent, because
sure. So I went to Catholic school for 12 years, so I can only give like the Catholic perspective. But yeah, I mean, I would say like, well, if God was evil, then I guess God would be evil, but he's not. God is good.
But then how do you define good? Like
good is whatever God commands. Like good is by the will of God.
Okay, if God is, it's that old who is it? The Voltaire argument, right? Like if, like the problem of evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
If God, let me try.
It's something like if God is all powerful and could stop all evil, but chooses not to, he's an asshole. If he allows evil to happen and does it himself, he's evil or whatever. He's either not all powerful or he's not like benevolent, because he could stop the evil, but he chooses not to. So he's either a dick or he's lazy. So he's not all powerful or something, right? It's something like that, I think.
Okay, never mind. That's not what I'm trying to make. There's another argument where either good is defined by God,
mm-hmm.
or God decides what is good.
Yeah, there's a name for this. I don't remember what it is. But basically, the idea is like, is something good because God commands it, or does God just know what is good, and therefore he commands it? Does goodness exist above God, or does God command goodness, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is like, somebody said divine command theory, maybe? Wait, the Euthyphro dilemma. There's a name for this, but I don't know if this is actually important. Like the thing would be like, if God commands it, then it's good. And I think most Christians would just say, yeah, if God commands it, then it's good. And then you could say, well, what if he commanded things that weren't good? And you say, well, I guess that would be the new good, but like he doesn't.
Well, now you have a moral theory that is basically absurd, right? Like if it's only good just because God commands it,
mm-hmm.
then your moral theory is just at the whim of God. So it could result in the maximum suffering for everybody.
Well, it could, but I mean, it doesn't. But I mean, humans that believe in God would say like, well, I mean, all of human existence is at the whim of God, that God could blink his eye and wipe all humans out. So of course, if human existence is at the whim of God, then of course human morality would be at the whim of God.
Then
right?
What's good or bad is meaningless, right? Because it's just whatever God wills.
Yeah, but that's not meaningless. Like the command of God is the most important meaning, because God is literally the source of everything in the universe. Why would that make it meaningless?
Yeah, well, I guess you could make, there's the first argument would be how we define good or bad kind of just breaks down to God's command, and then the second is you don't really have access to God's commands or thoughts.
Well, we do. We have access to God's to God's thoughts, because we have divinely inspired scripture, right? So the writings in the Bible were human authors that were divinely inspired by God to transcribe his thoughts.
Well, we're leaving the train station and having arguments outside.
Yeah, sure. I know. That's just.
But you know where this ends, right? Eventually get to a position where it's not logically defensible, because you can't really have access to that.
Oh, of course, but that's why religious people are dualists. They believe that you have the material and the immaterial. And as soon as you've embraced, in my opinion, any form of dualism, we can throw a lot of logic almost like out the window. Because if dualists believe in the immaterial and I can't access the immaterial, then I can't win any argument against you, because now you can basically make whatever bullshit up you want, and that's. But I would argue the same for more realism. That once you begin to say that, listen, why can't we just agree? Listen, this is the best way to do it, okay? Make some basic moral axioms. If people disagree with them, fucking kill them or ship them off somewhere. And then we can all just say fuck meta-ethics and then work on our normative theories and then our applied positions. I think that's the best way to do it, okay?
Okay, here's my issue. I just think that how you treat science and epistemology, like why can't you just treat morals and ethics the same way?
Because they're not. Because scientific investigations.
Why can't you just use the same language?
Because we can't. Because it's totally different. Scientific investigations.
That's why a dualist can argue in the same way that you're arguing. It's just all relative It's just all
because I
relativistic
think
and
that I
our
can use
moral
no, but it's
stances are
not
equal.
because if I punch you in the face, that's always going to hurt. If I drop a weight on your foot, that's always going to hurt. Like I can appeal to things like sense data, right? And I can make these scientific investigations and I can produce like measurable things that like all of us from our sense data will probably agree on. But when it comes to morality, damn, dude, different cultures can have radically different opinions about that shit. I don't know how the fuck I can convince like if I were to get like some random fucking tribesman from an island that's never seen anything before, I can like show him enough things to convince him that an airplane will fly, but I don't know if I could show him enough to convince him like God is real or convince him that like, you know, fucking animals is wrong or something. Like I don't know how I would even possibly, because I can't show that. I can't show right or wrong anywhere. That's never ever been demonstrated and never will, because these are immaterial concepts that I would say don't exist, which is why I'm an anti-realist.
Well, like I said, you just show him that his value, the underlying axiom of his values rely on well-being and suffering.
Yeah, but again, I feel like well-being and suffering doesn't mean anything. Like our oh god.
I think all religious people feel the same way too. Like I don't think that they would accept a god if the god's definition of what's good is maximum suffering for everybody.
Okay.
And yeah, like it. What were you about to say about the well-being?
I don't remember. Okay, listen. I have to leave pretty soon because I've got stuff I've got to do today. I will give you the final word. Hit us up with your final things that you want to leave us with, and then if you want to point anybody at anything, go for it.
I don't want to point anyone to anything. Is it true that you're debating Stefan Molyneux?
I don't know. I hope so, but I doubt it. But we'll see. Train says it could happen.
I think you have to do it, man.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's like the worst person.
Yeah, he's pretty dumb and bad.
Like I'm Canadian, and I just think that a lot of it's very strange that a lot of the worst YouTubers are all Canadian.
Yeah, like Lauren Southern, Crawford, Jordan Peterson,
JF, like
yeah,
and I don't know why that is, and Molyneux too. Like yep. I don't know. I guess if you are gonna debate him, good luck, and I hope that you find a way to expose him for the fraud that he is. Like he can't even make the most basic syllogistic arguments. He fails at step one when it comes to like logical arguments, and I think it's like embarrassing, and I'm just really, really surprised that he has like close to 1 million followers.
I don't know if
I don't know what that is.
I don't know if you saw my stream where you were doing this, but he released a book called The Art of the Argument, and I like opened it and I went through the first few pages, and I think on like page 2 he was like, let's talk about the different types of arguments. I think he said the difference, it was like one can be valid and one can be logical. And it was like the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah, like a high school student
like
intro to logic wouldn't even fail that. Like,
oh my god.
Like why? Like, and I can't believe this. He has 1 million followers,
and he calls himself like the savior of Western philosophy too. It's like really embarrassing.
Or people call him the philosophy of the right, and I'm just like, it's so ironic and yet appropriate that he is the philosophy of the right. Like he's the philosopher of the right.
Yeah, he was trying to make the valid versus sound distinction, but he failed miserably. And his descriptions were hilariously stupid. He was like, this argument works because it's logical. It was literally something like that. It was real fucking dumb. Like, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I think I just want to say I think that you're doing a really great job, and you have a lot of moral responsibility that I think is objectively true, and that you should yeah, good luck, and I hope you prepare very well for that Molyneux debate, because I think he's horrible.
Yeah, if it happens,
for some reason, your channel is like a very interesting intersection between left-wing and right-wing politics, and that's why I think it's like that's probably why you're so popular, and I think that's a good thing.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, thanks, buddy. I appreciate
All right. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it too. All right. Good luck.
Right, see you later.
See ya.
Amen. Get all the black emotes out of here. What the fuck are you guys going on about?